being that you're from Alabama, and how did that all come about?
Well, I was fortunate enough to be able to study abroad in the Auburn Study Abroad program in 1985. And being from Alabama, we were accustomed to a type of architecture that we all thought was pretty great. Antebellum homes, beautiful churches, and everyday architecture that was modest. When I had the opportunity to study abroad, I'll never forget flying back in after that time in Europe and looking at the buildings in Hartsfield Airport as like thin and very temporary buildings. So from that moment on, I had this reference now that I had never had before. Growing up in the South has many wonderful things, but permanent buildings aren't one of them. So I was inspired to design buildings that maybe transcended the temporary, and Italy spoke to me in that regard, plus the lifestyle. The lifestyle of Italy was, I think, very similar to some of the places and cultures that you find in Alabama. In fact, I always chuckle at this bookmark that I found in this little bookstore in Florence, Italy, and the bookmark said, "Alabama is America's answer to Tuscany." And you would think only maybe being in Florence or some urban places like that might be hard to see. But step right outside the walls of Florence and get into the countryside, and people are toting shotguns around and shooting pheasant and boar and living with the land and very agricultural. So there was this tie in there. And the other thing that I think is really exciting about thinking of the South in relationship to Italy is that a lot of great art has come out of the South. You think about F. Scott Fitzgerald, think about Capote, go on and on and on, all these great artists, and Faulkner, and so on and so forth. Why is that? It's fertile for these things because I think the culture is diverse. I think the weather is 4 seasons, and it gives us a lot of opportunity to create for whatever reason. When Steph and I were able to go to New York, we went often. We had a lot of clients in Manhattan, and we were sitting in the Hearst building and talking to Hearst Publication about this book and some other publications. And I looked on the whiteboard, and they had listed all of these designers that were coming up in the various publications that they have. And all were Southern designers that you would know: Barbara Westbrook, Bill Peace, Suzanne Kassler, Beth Webb, on and on and on and on. And there are a couple other noteworthy Northeastern designers, but only 2 out of a list of about 30.
Right.
So it is something in the water, something in the air, and the world is finding their way to our doorstep.
Well, and Suzanne's not originally from the South, but I think I'm from Washington, D.C., and
2 transplants.
Yeah, and I have a lot of friends here that are from different parts, but there's something that I noticed when I moved to the South is that people really respect their homes and their space in a way that's really different from the Northeast. I mean, there are some, there's Embassy Row and Wesley Heights, and there are some beautiful parts of Washington, but for the most part, people don't take that time for, they're very intellectual people, and that's kind of second on the list. But I find that aesthetics are really important in the South, and from people to houses, and so it does, that seems right to me. And Melanie Turner, Suzanne Kassler, Beth Webb, these are all great talents, and you go into houses here and you're like, wow, this is stunning. And then we have ADAC, which many cities don't have access to this design world. that is just at everybody's fingertips. And when I first moved here, driving, West Paces Ferry and Habersham and Blackland and Tuxedo, all these great streets, you just like aghast. And in fact, this house that's in your book, this is on Habersham, right?
That's correct.
I love that house, and it's a Neil Reed house, and it's just, it doesn't really get much better than this.
No, it doesn't. And the South has this really great history of architecture that started, of course, if you think of Charleston and Savannah.
Mm-hmm.
But as time went on, because of that European heritage and close connection to Europe, architects from Europe would come over and do tours of the South and design these incredible estates. And then that all went away, of course, as politics changed and time went on. But there is a great living example of this architecture that has inspired people like me and others, particularly when you think about Auburn having its rural studio for the kids. And growing up in a place where you could go to every small town has that type of architecture that's still there. So I see how the base of interest is there, and it all sprung from Europe because we're all transplants ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
But the South, for whatever reasons, has maintained its cultural ties to this type of taste.
Well, and I loved how you referenced Sargent and the paintings and sort of leaving a little space for one's interpretation. And I thought that was an interesting, I don't know if you're familiar with Alice Neal, the painter, but there's a painting, she was, I think she was at the Whitney, I can't remember the last place where the exhibit was, but there's this beautiful painting of this black man, and all the space around him is left white because he didn't come back for the sitting, but it's what made the painting so special. So I'm curious to hear from you about how that works in architecture, because sometimes less is more, and I guess you're thinking of the light and everything, but I want to hear about that and what makes a house special to you because of that.
Well, I also went to a great exhibit at the Whitney of unfinished portraits, and portraits that you would be very familiar with the face wiped clean because they could never get happy with it. And when you look at it, you can almost see yourself or a relative in that painting, although it may have been Washington or some other famous figure. So when you look at a piece of architecture and you can see yourself living there, there's a reason why.